Hi, good evening to everyone. Good evening to all the viewers. I hope I am clearly audible to everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank ClearTax for inviting me here as a speaker on this topic of deep diving into various scenarios under GST. I hope all of us are aware of ClearTax, which is a fantastic software when it comes to GST reconciliation, filing of returns. A lot of different features are there. So I'm sure everyone must have seen the software. If you haven't seen, I'm sure you should explore it. Now, the topic which has been given to me is deep diving into various scenarios under GST. We have a few scenarios which we'll be discussing, which are very practical, which are something which we see on a regular basis, which different kinds of businesses face when it comes to making supplies apart from sales. So there are different kinds of removals of goods which can be made apart from making sale of goods. So there are different kinds of scenarios that we would be discussing one by one as to how would GST be applicable in all of those scenarios, right? So the basic coverage of this topic is going to be buy one get one free. Next is ITC on gift and free samples. If they are given, how ITC would be there, and what would be the output tax that would be applicable. With regard to warranty, if any goods are given under warranty, what happens in those cases. ITC if it is reversed on dead stock or not. So if my inventory is there, some which are not to be sold, which are to be, let's say, destructed, or which are to be thrown away, in that case, what are the implications of GST when it comes to the output tax and the input tax credit as well. And donations, when we are giving those donation, what happens. And I've added a couple of more aspects as well which I thought might be relevant here. Vouchers, what happens to vouchers when we are selling under through any consideration apart from bank or cash, which may be in the form of vouchers. So you can always subscribe to the ClearTax YouTube channel, wherein there'll be a lot of videos, similar kind of videos they can you always see. So with this, we start with one important aspect of buy one get one free, right? So here in buy one get one free, there are different kinds of products that are given free of cost, different kind of transactions which are structured in various ways in order to uh, attract the consumers, which may be in the form of marketing of one product, which are two products given at the product of one price, or wherein one product is given, a dissimilar product is given free of cost. So basically we need to understand that when two products are there and one is given free of cost and the other is charged, it doesn't usually mean that the consumer is buying the other product actually free of cost. Usually the seller who is selling those products, what he does is he would have the price of the free product also ingrained within the sale price which he is charging for the chargeable product. So if somebody is charging 2000 rupees for two shirts, it doesn't really mean that the price of two shirts and the way they are showing it is one shirt free along with the other shirt. So 2000 rupees worth of shirt, if it is given free of cost along with another shirt which is 2000 worth, it doesn't really mean that the cost which is in the hands of the seller is 4000 rupees. It cannot be possible, right? So the basic premise here is that usually the product which is given as free of cost is only a marketing tool. It is not something wherein one product is free of cost to the buyer. It is actually something wherein they are paying for two products, but it is being represented as if they are paying for only one product, right? So we cannot consider supply of one item for consideration, other without consideration, right? So in other words, these are nothing but two or more individual supplies, right? So wherein a single price is charged. So we need to just find out whether those two individual supplies that are happening, wherein a single price is charged for those two supplies happening together, is it naturally bundled or is it not naturally bundled? So if they are considered to be naturally bundled, then they can be considered to be composite supply, right? So if they are composite supply, then the principal supply which is there needs to be taken for the purpose of the rate of tax and for the purpose of consideration as well, right? So when it is a composite supply, we are taking example here which is given is laptop bag free, rather I would say. Here it is written laptop free, which is should be laptop bag free along with laptop. So in that case, what happens is laptop bag is considered to be the free supply and laptop is considered to be the one which is chargeable to tax, right? So whatever rate is applicable on laptop should ideally be applicable on laptop bag as well, because this is a composite supply. Naturally, these two are given together, these two are naturally bundled, and wherein the principal supply is that of the laptop. So the rate which is applicable to the laptop would be applicable to the bag as well, right? Now, what if toothbrush is given along with toothpaste, right? So in that case, usually these two are not considered to be composite supplies. This is only a marketing tool wherein a toothpaste company is trying to give a toothbrush in order to lure the consumers, right? So in that case, what essentially would happen is that it would be considered as a mixed supply, and wherein mixed supply is there, in that case the higher rate which is applicable to toothbrush or toothpaste needs to be taken for the purpose of charging GST, right? So we need to identify the taxability depending on whether it is a composite supply or mixed supply, which is dependent on the fact whether the products are naturally bundled or not, right? Now once we know that this is a composite or a mixed supply, irrespective of that, we need to remember that whatever input tax credit is there in respect of the input or input services or the capital goods which is used or intended to be used in making these items which are maybe free of cost or maybe chargeable to tax. Both these items, whatever tax goes into their inputs, that particular tax would be available as input tax credit. Now, there's a lot of confusion in the market when people are saying if you have given something free of cost, in that case the ITC which is there needs to be reversed on that. Please remember, wherever we are talking about these cases wherein one product is given free of cost along with the other product, either buy one get one, buy two get one, anything, in each of these cases these cannot be considered as a free item, or these cannot be considered as a gift item. So these can only be stated to be a marketing tool wherein two products are given, and the way they are structuring it is to make sure that the consumer thinks that he's getting one product free of cost. So for the seller, he would be getting the complete input tax credit on both the free product and the chargeable product. There would not be any reversal of ITC to that extent, right? Now I'll talk about a couple of other scenarios at the end that we are looking at. What if nominal value is charged for the free item, right? In a lot of cases, what we see that, let's say if I go to a shop in a shopping mall, wherein I would see that, let's say if I do a shopping worth rupees 10,000, in that case a watch is given to me worth rupees 3,500 at the cost of rupees 100, right? So if I'm buying, let's say 10,000 worth of goods, in that case I get a watch worth rupees 3,500 at the rate of rupees 100. So in that case, nominal value is charged for those items. Again, whatever nominal value is charged, that nominal value would be considered as the price of that product, and GST would be chargeable on that. Once again, whatever input tax credit is there, that would be completely available, right? So even if you're charging a smaller value, it doesn't really mean that it would be classified as a composite or a mixed supply, because there are two different values which are being assigned to those items. That is why in the market you would feel that even when it comes to this laptop bag and laptop, you would see, even though you're only buying the laptop, the shopkeeper, when he's doing the billing, let's say you're buying a 40,000 worth of laptop, in that case what he would do is he would bill in the form of, let's say, 39,800 as the value of the laptop and 200 as the value of the bag. So he would charge two separate rates for it. So if that is the case, in that case two separate rates would be applicable, GST would be applicable separately on laptop and laptop bag. But if it is shown as if the transaction is there in the form that the laptop is the one which is chargeable, which is 40,000, and the laptop bag is free of cost, then the rate which is applicable on the laptop would be applicable on the bag as well, because it is a composite supply. Of course, in case of mixed supply, which is a very dangerous proposition, if I am giving the free item which has a higher rate, let's say 18% rate, whereas the item which I am selling is having a rate of 12%, then the entire transaction would have a rate of 18%. So I need to be very clear that if I'm doing it as a mixed supply and the free item has a higher rate, then I may be landing up in trouble, because tomorrow the department may come after me and they may charge higher rate also on the main product, right? So this is something which we need to be very careful about. Last, what if shown as a discount? So if you go to most of the shopping malls, what they would essentially do is, whenever you're buying shirts free of cost, they would what they would do is they would charge, let's say, 4,000 for the shirt. As I gave an example, for 2,000 is the value of one shirt. They would write the value of two shirts as 2,000 into 2, and they would write 4,000 rupees, and then they would show a discount of 2,000 rupees, and finally the value comes out to 2,000 rupees. In that case also the GST becomes applicable on 2,000. So a lot of people, in order to escape the rigors of this free product, of this composite and mixed supply, what they would do is they would show the price of both the products, and then they would show the item, whatever value is being shown, as a discount, right? So we need to be very careful about the way the transaction is structured here, right? So if we are showing it as a discount, in that case separate rate of GST would be applicable on the both the products. So if, let's say, two products are given and the value, let's say 2,000 into 2 less 2,000, so GST would be applicable on 2,000 itself. But what if I'm giving toothbrush and toothpaste, right? So let us say there are multiple products which are being supplied together, or multiple packs which are being supplied together. Let us say 100 rupees is the value of the toothpaste and 10 rupees is the value of the toothbrush. If I'm showing 110 rupees, 100 rupees as toothbrush, sorry, 100 rupees as toothpaste and 10 rupees as toothbrush, less discount as 10 rupees, in that case GST would be applicable on 100 rupees. But we need to identify in this case what discount would be applicable to toothpaste and what applicable would be to the toothbrush, right? So if 10 rupees discount is entirely attributable to the toothbrush, then 100 rupees whatever tax is chargeable on the toothpaste would be charged for the GST purposes, right? So we need to be very careful about the way transaction is structured. Are we showing it as a free supply? Are we showing it as a discount? Or are we showing it as a nominal value transaction? Next, we are talking about a scenario where an ITC, whether it is available on gift and samples given away by the company. So we are talking about two things here. If I'm giving free samples and gifts, in that case, section 17(5)(h) says that if any goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, or disposed of by way of gift of free samples, in that case, the entire ITC which is attributable to the gift of free samples needs to be reversed, right? Similarly, schedule 1, they have mentioned permanent transfer or disposal of business asset where ITC has been availed. So what they are essentially saying in the first case is that if I'm giving something as a gift of free samples, ITC is not available. Under schedule 1, what they are mentioning is that if I'm giving something free of cost, that means I'm sure when I'm giving something as a stock, it is a business asset of mine, though it is not defined, but business asset should mean even the stock, because it appears in your balance sheet asset side. So whatever stock I'm giving, wherein I had availed ITC on this, it would be considered as a schedule 1 transaction. So does it mean that I would have to reverse the ITC under block credit as well as show it as a schedule 1 transaction? In that case, this would be a double whammy upon me, right? But we need to be very clear here and understand the way this wordings are structured for schedule 1. The schedule 1 wordings are, if any business asset is transferred where ITC has been availed, right? So if I have not availed ITC because I have given my goods as gift of free samples, in that case it may have been considered as block credit. That means I may not have taken ITC on that. If that is the case, if I have not taken ITC on that, in that case schedule 1 does not become applicable, permanent transfer or disposal, because the condition is that ITC has been availed, right? So if ITC is not availed, schedule 1 is not applicable, right? So next scenario that we are talking about is, what if I have shown something as a schedule 1 supply, right? Can I actually avail ITC if I want to show it as a schedule 1 supply? So first scenario we said, if ITC is not there, it is not a supply. If we don't take ITC, it is not a supply. What if I have taken ITC and I want to show it as a schedule 1 supply. Do I have an option to do that? That is something we need to be very careful about, right? So we need to bifurcate this concept into two halves. First half is that one first scenario, I am taking the ITC and I am showing it as a supply. Second scenario is that I am reversing the ITC and I'm not showing it as a supply, right? So do I have an option? To my humble opinion, the answer is yes, I do have an option, right? Either to reverse the ITC and not show it as a supply, or take the ITC and show it as a schedule 1 supply, that is a supply without consideration, right? So, circular number 92, let's read the wordings of it, the way they have actually worded this circular. Let's understand this. Samples provided free of cost, not to be a supply except where it falls under schedule 1, right? So if it is not falling in schedule 1, it is not a supply. Where distribution of gifts falls within schedule 1, supplier would be eligible to avail the ITC. So what is being said in the circular is that if it falls in schedule 1, that means it is a transfer of business asset, then I can avail the ITC. I need not reverse my ITC under 17.5H. Also, if I have we are very clear that if I have already reversed the ITC under 17.5H, it is not a schedule 1 supply, right? So in other words, I do have an option either to reverse the ITC or take the ITC and show it as a supply. That is what my humble opinion is here. Now a viewpoint may come here as to what is the best case scenario. What should I do in that case? If there are two options which are available, in that case, which is the best option that I should avail here, right? Then I would like to recommend something here. We should understand whether the recipient to whom I am giving the goods as free sample, right? Whether that recipient is a registered person under GST or not a registered person under GST. So if he's a registered person and if I show it as a schedule 1 supply, then he can always take the input tax credit on that, right? So in other words, if I have an input of 100 rupees and output of 110 rupees, right? And I am the one who's giving something free of cost and I'm showing it as a schedule 1 supply, right? So if 110 rupees, the goods which I am giving to the third person, if he can avail the entire ITC, he would not mind paying me this 110 rupees, correct? Because he would be able to avail the entire ITC on this amount. But let us say he is an unregistered person and he says that I won't pay you a single rupee for the free sample. In that case, if I show it as a schedule 1 supply, then I have to pay the taxes on 110 rupees, of 110 rupees, which is on my output. However, if I show it as an ITC reversal, then maybe the cost was only 100 rupees, right? So I would essentially want to reverse my ITC of 100 rupees and not show it as a supply if the recipient is unregistered, because in that case, the total loss that I would be incurring on account of giving something as a free sample would be 100 rupees, right? Whereas if I would have shown it as a schedule 1 supply and even if I would have taken ITC, my output would have been at 110 rupees. So I would always want to incur a lower loss. So I would want to reverse the ITC and show it as a block credit if the recipient is unregistered. However, if he is registered, then the entire credit chain would not get broken. I would recognize my input at 100 rupees, my output was 110 rupees, and the recipient who's getting the free sample would get the input tax credit on that, right? So this is how free samples given under the GST law should be treated. Now, with regard to gifts, a very similar proposition can be held here as well. Now, there's an alternate view which can be there with regard to gifts, which we can discuss about here. Now, if gift has been given because of fulfillment of a contractual obligation of specified purchase, then the sale consideration received earlier would have already contained GST, right? Okay, let's take an example. Let's say I'm a person who is dealing in papers, right? If I'm a person who is dealing in paper, let's say you are a person who is buying the goods from me, right? Now, let's say the contract is that if you buy paper worth rupees 1 crore from me, in that case I would be giving you a gift, which may be a television set or refrigerator, whatever it may be, if you buy goods worth rupees 1 crore from me during the whole financial year. Correct? Now let us say you have accomplished this goal and I have given this to you free of cost. Do you think this can be considered as a gift in its true sense? To be honest, this view says that this is only arising out of contractual obligation, and this is nothing but amount which has been already paid. So 1 crore rupees, when you had paid me for buying those goods, you had already purchased that TV as well from me. So this is not a gift essentially. This is only a payment, or this is only something which I am giving to you from a contractual obligation. So this is not a gift, but this is something wherein there is no supply, because there is no supply without consideration which is happening here. Let's understand the meaning of gifts which has been given under various laws here. First, Sonia Bhatia versus State of UP, gift was defined by the Supreme Court as a gift is commonly defined as a voluntary transfer of property by one person to the other, right? Without any consideration or compensation. So this is a voluntary transfer and not a transfer which arises out of contractual obligations, right? Next, gift is, as per Black's Law Dictionary, gift is defined to mean a voluntary conveyance of land or transfer of goods from one person to other, made gratuitously and not upon consideration of blood or money. So if you're not paying through your blood or through money, in that case, it is considered as a gift, which is again a voluntary transfer either of land or of goods, right? Next, Gift Tax Act also defines the word gift to mean transfer by one person to other of any existing movable or immovable property. Again, the word is voluntarily and without consideration in money or money's worth. So all of these use the words voluntary. So in other words, for it to be a gift, there should be two things which should be absent. First, there should not be a contractual obligation. Second, there should not be a consideration in money or money terms. So if there is no consideration, money or money's worth, in that case it can be classified as a gift, right? So when we were talking about the example of 1 crore worth of goods which I am giving to you, and then I am giving you a TV, there is a contractual obligation and there's a money's worth or money which is involved in that 1 crore itself. So in my humble opinion, that should not be categorized as gift, right? If that should not be categorized as gift, it should not be chargeable either under Schedule 1, or it should not be chargeable under, or should not be reversed as ITC under 17(5)(h), right? Now, what if I'm giving certain materials as business promotion materials in the form of, let's say, publicity material? I'm giving you a calendar, a gift which is there during Diwali, or any customized gifts which I'm sending out to my clients. In that case, if it is a business promotion item, if it can be very clearly said that I am doing this only to gain business in future, it is not arising out of a voluntary transfer. This is something which I am doing for gaining some traction with my clients or gaining some market in the future. So in that case, one can clearly say that this is not a gift but a business promotion transaction. That is why neither 17(5)(h) nor Schedule 1 should be applicable, right? But again, these kind of transaction would be subject to huge amounts of litigation tomorrow, right? So we have to make sure that when we are giving something as a contractual obligation, then in that case it is not a gift, right? So we need to be very clear about these kind of scenarios. Now we are talking about warranties, right? So when we are talking about warranty, let's look at this transaction in front of us. Let's say we are talking about a Samsung service center, right? You had bought a mobile from Samsung, and let's say this particular product had any issues later on, right? Now, either you approach a dealer who had sold those products, or you approach the service center, right? Now, when you approach the service center, let's say the product is covered during warranty. So let's say the mobile has a warranty of 1 year. After 6 months, you experience some uh, problems in the parts of that particular phone, and then you find that it needs to be replaced. So if it needs to be replaced, the question comes in whether GST will be chargeable to you, because we need to remember, if it is a warranty covered product, then service center would not be charging a single penny from you. The entire money which is payable to the service center would be paid by the manufacturer itself, right? So the service center essentially would be not charging the customer but charging the manufacturer. It would not be giving something out of its own pocket, right? So let us say the manufacturer sells certain parts to the service center. Of course, the service center must be holding some parts with themselves. So the manufacturer must have given them under a sale invoice, right? A GST invoice. Thereafter, the service center supplies these parts free of cost as a replacement to the customer, right? In that case, what the service center does is, for the new parts which it is billing to the customer, sorry, rather giving to the customer, it would be billing directly to the manufacturer, right? So the service center would be issuing an invoice for the parts, correct? To whom? To the manufacturer, right? And if any repair services are there as well, so any service charges are there as well, that also service center will be charging to the manufacturer, correct? So the manufacturer would be the one who would be bearing the burden. So essentially, manufacturer would be selling in the beginning to the service center when it supplies the parts. Later on, service center bills back to the manufacturer when it sells those parts to the customer, but bills it back to the manufacturer, right? So this is how the transaction would be structured, right? Now let us say we are talking about a dealer, right? Assuming I am buying certain motor parts, we are assuming an example of, let's say, mobile parts. I'm now, let's say, buying a motor part, right? Now if when I'm buying a motor part, it may happen that I'm giving my old motor part free of cost back to the relevant service center, or to the dealer, or to the manufacturer, as the case may be, and that service center is giving me the new parts free of cost. So the question comes in, I am also making a supply and service center is also making a supply. In that case, would GST be chargeable on the supply which is being made here? Would this be considered as a chargeable transaction, right? Now we are waiting for any kind of judgments to come in under the GST law, but we have a few precedences from the earlier regime, from the VAT regime and the excise regime. Let's see what those judgments used to say. So the first judgment is Premnath Motors, which says that price so fixed and received is thus a consolidated price for the car and the parts that may have to be supplied by way of replacement in pursuance of the warranty. So what they are essentially saying is that when the goods had been sold, that means when I had bought that car, I had already paid for the warranty. The warranty aspect was embedded in the value of the car which was being sold, correct? Thereafter, one more judgment of Prem Motors. Again, this is a different judgment. Prem Motors is different from Premnath Motors. This is a MP division bench, Madhya Pradesh division bench judgment, which says that when the service center is supplying to the customer, so this is neither a sale of parts by the dealer to the consumer or to the manufacturer. What is effectively done is passing of the parts from the manufacturer to the customer. Again, to be honest, I personally believe that this would not have as much value under the GST law, because this is what they are saying is that this is not a sale of parts at all. So service center is not selling the part at all. What service center is essentially doing is it is only giving something which is arising out of a previous contractual obligation. So previous contractual obligation required it to replace the items free of cost. So whether it is chargeable or not, we have a few more judgments, then we'll see whether what can be a view which can be taken here, right? Next, again with regard to cars, Premier Automobiles Limited, principle of warranty covering cars sold has been well enunciated. Free services have to be rendered. The whole object behind warranty is that a customer who has made a heavy investment while purchasing a car is assured of proper performance of the vehicle. So again, Premier Automobiles is also saying that when you had bought the cars, the free services, let's say 3 vouchers were given to you that you had already paid earlier. And the only reason why you bought the car, you made such a heavy investment, is to have a proper performance of it, right? So that means what they are essentially saying is that since tax had been paid earlier itself when you had bought the cars, later on when free replacement is being made to the customer, there should not be any GST chargeable, right? To the customers, GST would not be there because he had already paid GST while buying the cars. So these are those judgments. But we had one Supreme Court judgment in the earlier law itself which went against all of these. And they had considered all these judgments earlier. This judgment said that the manufacturer may have purchased from the open market value the parts for replacement of the defective parts. So let us say the manufacturer who had made those goods did not have those parts. Then it would have ideally purchased from the market and it would have paid taxes while purchasing the goods from the market. And when providing to the service center, then also they would have paid taxes. So the position would not be different if the said parts are provided by the assessee, that means by the service center, and it has received the price for it. That means they are saying service center is supposed to charge GST on it through the manufacturer whenever the goods are sold to the manufacturer, right? So this is what was held in the Supreme Court judgment, Mohammad Ikram and Sons. But once again in 2019, Mr. P. Chidambaram was arguing this case for Tata Motors Limited, which were before the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court did not take a view. They transferred this case to division bench. But what had happened here was when Tata Motors was selling cars, let's say Tata Motors was selling its car. In that case, when selling those cars, it had given the sale invoice, and the dealer who was later replacing the parts free of cost, for that the manufacturer was giving the dealer a credit note. So here what we are saying is the dealer is not raising an invoice upon the manufacturer for the free replacement of part, but a credit note is given by the manufacturer for the sales return. In other words, manufacturer had sold the goods, and thereafter when the dealer supplied the goods to the consumer on behalf of the manufacturer, in that case the manufacturer gave a credit note to the dealer. In that case, whether sales tax was leviable or not, this matter is still pending before Supreme Court. However, they have said that they have some reservations about this judgment of Supreme Court in Mohammad Ikram Khan and Sons. So thereby a final view of this is yet to come from the Supreme Court division bench. I'm sure it would be an iconic landmark judgment in case of Tata Motors when it comes in the future. But for the time being, if I would want to take a view for warranty, I would essentially take a view that when the dealer or the service center is giving something to the consumer free of cost, I would always charge GST in order to avoid any kind of disputes in future. And I would charge that GST to the manufacturer, and manufacturer does not have any problem with the GST being charged upon him because that said manufacturer would be able to avail the input tax credit on this. So ideally under warranty, I would always pay GST because not paying GST would result in denial of ITC maybe tomorrow, or maybe it may be considered as a tax tomorrow on account of the service center or the dealer. So the government may come after the service center or dealer and may collect taxes from them, for which ITC may not be available to the manufacturer. However, if I show it as a supply today for which the manufacturer gets the complete ITC, in that case the entire credit chain does not get broken, and everybody gets input tax credit, and everyone is happy here because they are not making any payments in cash, to be honest, because manufacturer bills to the dealer and dealer bills back to the manufacturer on account of warranty contracts, right? So this is something which can be helpful here. Now we are talking about dead stocks. What happens if we are having certain dead inventory with us? What do I do with this dead inventory? Now we are talking from two perspectives. First perspective would be that of the manufacturer. First perspective would be that of the dealer. The second perspective would be that of the manufacturer, right? Now let us say I am a manufacturer of medicines, correct? I have given certain goods to you free of cost. Rather, I would say I had given certain goods to you as a sale. not as free of cost. I've given certain goods to you by supplying those goods to you. Correct? Now, let us say those goods become expired, right? Now, when those goods become expired, what happens is that you would be returning those goods back to me. That is the contract, that the manufacturer will take back those goods which are expired, those medicines which are expired, and then he would be destroying those medicines. Correct? So when I had given those goods to you, I had shown it as a sale or a supply. Now, what would you treat when you are returning back those goods to me? As a dealer, you're returning those goods back to me as the in that case, what would you do? First option is that you would show it as a supply. Second option is that rather than you showing it as a supply, I would be issuing a credit note against it. Correct? So, what if you are showing it as a supply? If you are showing it as a supply, in that case, I had charged GST from you while supplying those goods. Now, when you're returning back those goods, you would again show it as a supply back to me, right? And I would be thereafter entitled to avail the input tax credit on the receipt of the said goods. So when I sell the goods to you, you get the input tax credit. When you return those goods back to me, showing it as a supply, you can show it as a supply. I would get the input tax credit back on it. Correct? Now, the biggest question was, can you actually show a time expired goods as a supply? The circular has clarified, the aforesaid circular that we are seeing in front of us has clarified that yes, you can also show time expired goods, something which has expired. You can always show it as a supply, there is no problem, because this is not a sale, it's only a supply. GST is on supply and not on sale. So it's not essentially sale back, but it is only giving back those goods, time expired goods back to me. Now let us say when I had given the goods to you, I had given it 100 rupees to you, correct? Now you were allowed to supply it in the market at 150 rupees, right? Now when you're allowed to supply it at 150 rupees, let's say GST on that was 5%, right? So I had charged 5 rupees GST to you, and you would have supplied in the market at by charging 150 into 5%, which is 7.5 rupees. In that case, when you return back those goods to me, I would be taking ITC of 7.5 once again. Now, when I destroy those goods, then the circular says that wherever the goods are destroyed, in that case, as per 17.5H, I need to reverse my input tax credit on that. Then the question comes in whether I need to reverse the ITC on 5 rupees at which I had supplied to you, or 7.5 rupees at which you had supplied to me. So here it has been clarified, then you would be supplying at 7.5. So since ITC of 7.5 also comes to my books, I would be reversing my ITC on 7.5 rupees. So essentially I cannot take ITC of 7.5 if I have received any goods for destruction. So if I'm the manufacturer, you're the dealer, if you return those goods back to me, I can take the goods ITC on the receipt of the goods. But when I destroy those goods, I need to reverse my ITC on those goods. Thereafter, if instead of you showing it as a fresh supply, what if I decide to issue a credit note on this when you are returning back those goods? Now the issue here is that if the credit note is issued within 30th September of the next financial year, right? So I have sold the goods during the year 1920, right? Now I'm returning those goods back. You are returning those goods back rather within 30th September 2020, correct? So you can issue a credit note up to 30th September 2020 by showing the taxability, or you may show the tax liability, right? When you return back those goods, in that case, I am required, what I'm required to do is whatever output I had paid while supplying those goods. Let us say once again I had charged 100 plus 5 rupees from you. Then in that case, when I received the credit note, in that case 5 rupees would be reduced from my tax liability, right? So what will essentially happen is my output, which was increased by 5 rupees, GST would be decreased once again by 5 rupees. But what if you return those goods back to me after 30th September 2020? In that case, as per section 34, you cannot issue a GST credit note. You can issue of accounting of financial credit note without GST, right? In that case, what I would do is, as a manufacturer, I would be issuing a accounting credit note. When I issue a accounting credit note, in that case, there would not be any adjustment of tax. What do I mean by adjustment of tax? When I had paid output of 5 rupees and I had, let's say, reduced my output by 5 rupees, in that case, my tax liability had become zero. But if the time elapses and credit note is without GST, then output would have been at 5 rupees. Then reduction of output would not be at -5, so there would not be reduction of output tax, so it would be at 5 rupees. The output would stay at 5 rupees. And when you are returning those goods back to me, then in that case, when I had charged taxes from you, you had taken input tax credit. But when I issue the credit note, in that case, you are required to reverse the ITC also on that 5 rupees. But what if I issue a credit note which is an accounting credit note wherein I am not reducing my output? In that case, if I am not issuing a credit note with GST, in that case, you are not required to reverse your input tax credit. That is my humble opinion. Because the law says that, proviso to section 16(2) says that ITC will only be reversed in respect of those cases where there's a failure to pay. So let us say I had charged 100 plus 5 rupees from you, but later on a credit note of 100 plus 5 rupees is issued, then you are not required to make payment to me. If not required to make payment to me, in that case, you would be reversing the input tax credit on that, right? But if I have not issued a credit note with GST, in that case, let's say I've issued a credit note of 105 rupees entirely, but you are not required to reduce the input tax credit because there was no GST in the credit note. In that case, ideally, you would not be reversing your input tax credit also, because I had paid output of 5 rupees, you can take input of 5 rupees. And as per proviso to section 16(2), there is no failure to pay tax on your behalf. So law says that wherever there's a failure to pay tax on your behalf to me, in that case, you would be required to reverse the input tax credit. If you don't pay the consideration to me as per proviso to section 16(2), then you would reverse the ITC. But here, if I'm issuing a credit note and you are not required to pay even a single rupee to me, there cannot be any failure to pay. That is why I would say that wherever accounting credit note is issued or financial credit note is issued without GST, the recipient is not required to reverse the input tax credit. Finally, when, let's say, the goods have been returned back now. Now I am destroying those goods. 5 rupees was the output, 5 rupees was the credit note. Now the tax output was 0, but I had definitely availed input tax credit when I had manufactured those goods. So in this case, ITC which is attributable to the manufacture of those goods, that ITC would be reversed by me, right? So ITC would be reversed by me on the manufacture. So that means, if you interestingly look at section 17(5), it talks about reversal of ITC in respect of goods, right? So if, let's say, out of the 100 rupees cost, let us say 50 rupees was of materials, 30 rupees labor and 20 rupees overhead, then one can take a view, though it is not settled, one can take a view that ITC attributable only to 50 rupees, that is the manufacture part, would only be reversible under 17(5). So in that case, let's say if I am having a tax of 5%, my ITC reversed on destruction of manufactured good would be 50 rupees into 5%, which will be 2.5 rupees. Whereas in the first case, if the goods were treated as a return as a fresh supply, wherein I had supplied the goods at 100 rupees, you were returning at 150 rupees and you had charged 5% GST, in that case 7.5% was reversed. Whereas in the second case, only maybe 2.5 rupees may be reversed here. And the labor and overhead, whatever ITC was there, that may be taken. That is again a view which is coming out of it, though it will stand the course test of time when the courts decide on what is to be reversed under 17(5), whether labor and overheads to be reversed or not. So that is something which will only be decided in the days to come. So as a planner, if I am talking about a manufacturer, I would try to plan accordingly. whether I should go for fresh supply or I should issue a credit note. That I can plan. Now question comes in, do donations made by a company attract GST? Right? So what we are saying here is that donations are of two kinds, right? Let us say I'm running a company, right? Now when I'm running a company, I give certain amount as donation to an NGO. Let us say in kind itself, I have given uh, certain aspects, let's say any asset of mine, whatever, let's say I'm manufacturing medicines, right? I'm manufacturing medicines and I've given this to the NGO, correct? Now there are two kinds of donation. First donation is that which comes with a specific obligation. Second, which is a general donation which does not come with any obligation, right? Let us say, what is a specific obligation? I tell them that you are required to supply these goods to these people of this village, and you are undertaking this obligation, then only I'll be giving this medicine free of cost to you, right? So here there's a specific obligation which is there. So if that is the case, even if I'm not charging anything from them, it cannot be considered as something which is given out of a philanthropic activity. It may be considered to be given in the course of furtherance of business if there is a specific obligation on the recipient. So there is a obligation on the recipient that it may be considered as a supply. So whatever ITC, if you remember, we had talked about Schedule 1 first case, permanent transfer or disposal of business asset where ITC has been availed. So let's say I had manufactured those medicines, so I had availed ITC on that. Now, if there's a specific obligation on the recipient, in that case, I would show it as a Schedule 1 supply. It would be chargeable to tax. But what if I'm distributing this as a part of my CSR activity, but there is no specific obligation on the recipient? The recipient, as an NGO, it can distribute it in the manner and the way it wants to do it. In that case, there is no definite obligation on the recipient. If that is the case, in that case, it would be considered as a pure donation. Where it is considered as a pure donation, it would not be in the course of furtherance of business. In that case, we can take an opinion that it would not be chargeable to GST. And whatever ITC was taken, it may be available to that extent if it was not without any obligation, right? Now let us see one clarification which had come in circular 116 by 35 by 2019, when it was said that when the name of the donor is displayed in the recipient institution premises, right, in an expression of gratitude and public recognition of the donor's act of philanthropy, and not for any commercial gain, and not for giving publicity to the donor, then it cannot be said as advertising or promotion, and it cannot be considered as supply of service in the course of furtherance of business, and it would not be chargeable to GST. So let us say Mr. Mukesh Ambani gives a donation to any NGO in his own name, right? Now let us say the NGO recognizes his contribution by saying that received this much amount from Mr. Mukesh Ambani, received with thanks, something of that sort. Now in that case, it is not for giving any promotion or to any advertising. That is what the circular said. In that case, it would not be considered as supply of service, right? But if, let's say, Reliance Industries Limited is showing that this was being given as a philanthropic activity, in that case, let us say it is not out of CSR, but it is out of outside that. In that case, it may be considered, wherein the Reliance Industries Limited is recognized, then it may not be considered as a donation, but it may be considered as sponsorship. So if it is considered as sponsorship, in that case, it would be considered as supply of service because their name is being displayed and it is an advertising or promotion of their business. So donation in business name becomes very important. Now, if individual is registered, let us say I am an individual who is registered and I am giving and I had taken certain ITC. In that case, if I am not showing it as a Schedule 1 supply, it may still be considered, however, as 17(5)(h) reversal, because if any asset is given in the form of gift of free samples, which may be also covering donations, in that case, ITC reversal may be involved. So to that extent, if individual who's registered is doing it and he's giving a donation, in that case, this might be something which may be applicable, right? Donation in business name I've already covered. Donation of business asset I've already covered. What if you're giving a stock and medicines free of cost, right? Now we are covering an important concept of vouchers, right? Now, a lot of cases when we see that when we are buying goods from the market, they, let's say, issue a 500 rupees voucher to us. Now that 500 rupees voucher can be redeemed by us when we are making the next purchase, right? So what are vouchers under GST? What would be the treatment of vouchers under GST? Now we can also, let's say, buy Amazon gift voucher online and gift it to our friend on his birthday, let's say. In that case, when I'm buying a gift voucher online, would it be chargeable to GST, not chargeable to GST, is something which we are looking at, right? Now let's first understand the definition of vouchers, right? Vouchers have been defined. Money means Indian legal tender or any foreign currency, check, promissory note, anything of this sort. And this is important, the one which is marked in bold. Any other instrument recognized by the RBI. So basically, any instrument which is recognized by RBI would be considered as money, correct? So we need to be very clear which instruments are recognized by RBI, which may be categorized as money, right? Now, what is defined as voucher? Let's see the definition of voucher as per GST law. Voucher means any instrument where there is an obligation to accept it as consideration or part consideration for a supply of goods or services or both, right? And where the goods or services are both to be supplied or the identity of their potential supplier. That means voucher is something which is issued by any person and it is obligated by that person to accept it as consideration. And the identity of the goods which may be supplied, let's say 1200 rupees shirt may be bought against it, or identity of the potential supplier, that means who can provide this. Let's say Amazon says that you can buy 500 rupees, there's a gift voucher which is given and 500 rupees I can redeem against Bata. So identity of the supplier, which is Bata, is given, are either indicated on the instrument or in related documentation. So either they are on the documentation or in the instrument itself, right? Now, if we look at RBI provisions, RBI regulations which has been given, there they have defined an instrument called as prepaid instrument. It is called as a stored value instrument under Payments and Settlement Systems Act, right? This is a stored value instrument. What are prepaid instruments? These are considered as money. We need to remember prepaid instruments can only be considered as money and nothing else. Let's see what are prepaid instruments. Prepaid instruments have been defined by RBI as are those instruments that facilitate purchase of goods and services, including financial services, remittances, fund transfers against the value stored in or on such instruments, right? These are nothing but purchase of goods and services, remittances or fund transfers against the value stored in these instruments, correct? Now there are three kinds of instruments. From these three kinds, we'll have a pretty fair idea about what are prepaid instruments. First, these are closed systems PPIs. These are PPIs issued by an entity for facilitating purchase of goods and services from that entity only. No cash withdrawals are permitted. So let's say Amazon is issuing a gift voucher. We can only redeem it if we buy goods from Amazon, and we cannot redeem that Amazon gift voucher by providing it to Amazon and they will not give us cash against it, right? These are closed system PPIs, right? So in case of closed system PPIs, once again GST would not be applicable because these are nothing but money. We need to remember money definition said that any instrument recognized by RBI. PPIs are recognized instruments of RBI, and definition of both goods and services specifically excludes money. So Amazon gift voucher would not be chargeable to GST. Second, Semi-closed PPI. What is semi-closed PPI? These are PPIs issued for use at a group of clearly identified merchant locations which have a specific contract with the issuer to accept the PPIs as payment instruments, right? So, for example, what is the difference here? The difference is that the person who is issuing the voucher may be different from the person who is redeeming the voucher. Let us say we know there's a card called as payback card. Now payback is the one which is issuing the points, loyalty points, right? Whereas they may be redeemed at specific locations. Let's say at Central Mall, I can redeem my payback points at Central Mall. Now there are different vendors who would be accepting this. So payback would ideally have a contract with Central Mall or from different kinds of vendors, maybe Pantaloons or maybe different vendors. So in that case, these are semi-closed PPIs wherein issuer and redeemer are different. And the person who is buying the goods, he may get the points at one place and redeem it at another place. Now what are open system PPIs? Open system PPIs are issued by banks for use at any merchant for purchase of goods or services. So it may be cash withdrawal at ATMs, POS terminals or business correspondences. So these are nothing but debit cards or cash cards which are issued and which can be redeemed against cash as well. So these are nothing but instruments which are issued by banks, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. These are also prepaid instruments. Now let's try and identify the difference between prepaid instruments and voucher. Prepaid instruments are said to be containing a stored value. For example, Amazon gift voucher has a stored value of 1000 rupees. So they would be actually issuing the voucher at 1000 rupees. I buy the Amazon gift voucher at 1000 and they would be giving me at 1000 rupees. So it is nothing but stored value. So if you go to the malls, you would see that there are these cash cards which they issue, which can be redeemed at different food courts. So these are nothing but prepaid instruments. These are cash cards. Or let's say your digital wallet, your Paytm wallet. These are again prepaid instruments. So difference with voucher is that voucher has value to use. It may happen that you buy a Groupon, let's say on Groupon or Dine Out, you buy a coupon at let's say 200 rupees, which can be redeemed at a restaurant at 500 rupees. These are not prepaid instruments. These do not contain stored value. These are value to use. So you're paying 200 rupees, whereas you're getting a value of 500 rupees against that, right? So it is issued at a discount to the face value. So normally prepaid instruments which are issued at 200 rupees itself, they are issued at face value itself. Vouchers are generally issued at a discount. They are issued at 200 rupees, maybe redeemable at 500 rupees, right? Prepaid instrument is nothing but it is a monetary instrument for payment. So these are, it may be the gift, digital wallet, cash card, gift voucher, Amazon gift voucher. These are nothing but those vouchers which are in the form of different sorts of instruments of payment. Whereas voucher, it is an instrument which is with an obligation. So a third party supplier or a private supplier is issuing this, and this is acting as an instrument which is casting an obligation upon them to accept it as consideration. So if I buy a voucher from Dine Out, it would be casting an obligation on the restaurant to accept it as consideration because they have a contract with Dine Out, right? So this is how the transaction case of vouchers is there, right? In case of prepaid instruments, there will be no transaction, there will be no tax implication as this is money itself. In case of vouchers, whatever tax is there on the underlying goods or services, that would be applicable here also. Let us say 200 rupees was the value of the voucher which you are redeeming at a restaurant. So rate of tax on restaurant services is 5%. So on whatever we need to remember, voucher taxability would arise on the redeemable value. So even if you are issuing it at 200 rupees, GST would be chargeable on 500 rupees, right? So let us say GST was 25 rupees. In that case, when the voucher is issued, 5% GST, that is 25 rupees, would be charged on the voucher also. So voucher is a separate product, but it is taxed based on the underlying goods or services. Here the underlying services was the restaurant services, so 5% GST was applicable on the voucher also, right? Now we have a very famous advanced ruling in case of Kalyan Jewelers, which has, I think, got its own limitation and which should not be followed blindly. What it essentially says is that it is even considering prepaid instruments as vouchers, and it is not actually it is not taxing the underlying product, it is actually taxing the voucher itself. For instance, if it is a paper gift voucher, rate of paper is 12%. So it used to charge 12% irrespective of what is being bought from that gift voucher. Further, gift card, let's say there's a card, on the material of the card, the rate is 18%. So ideally, they said that rate of on gift cards, which is in the form of, let's say, credit card sort of a thing, the rate would be 18%. So essentially, they said that tax would be charged both on the gift voucher and the cards and also on the underlying goods or services. So let's say you're having a wallet of 1500 rupees that you're buying from the market, and there's a gift card of 500 rupees which you're redeeming against that. So in that case, what they said was 500 rupees would be applicable to GST and 1500 also would be applicable to GST. That is, wallet would be chargeable at 1500, whereas gift cards would also be chargeable at 500, which I personally believe would amount to double taxation, is not correct. So the underlying gift which is being bought, which is the wallet, that should be chargeable at 1500 rupees and not in my humble opinion, the voucher itself. Only the underlying goods or services which is being bought should be chargeable, right? Now, as I mentioned, the rate of tax would be based on the underlying commodity. Now, it is evident from the time of supply, which requires the supply to be identifiable at the relevant point. So from the time of supply, basically time of supply provision says that in the voucher, if I can identify the supply, for example, there's a voucher which says that you can buy a shirt worth rupees 1200 against this voucher. This is a voucher when supply is identifiable. So in that case, time of supply will be when the voucher is issued. So when the voucher was issued at 200 rupees, at that time itself, GST would be chargeable. Of course, tax will be chargeable on the redeemable value, which is at 500 rupees. But the time would be when the voucher is issued. But if supply is not identifiable, that means you can redeem this at Shoppers Stop against any product. In that case, GST would be not chargeable at the time when the voucher is issued, but at the time when the voucher is redeemed. So when the voucher is redeemed at 500 rupees, GST will be chargeable. Whatever the product, the underlying product, let's say the rate is 18%, GST would be chargeable on that product accordingly on 500 rupees, right? Okay. This is the last type of transaction in the issues that we would be covering today. Now, if you look at section 7 subsection 1, right? 7 subsection 1 says that these are the list of supplies. These are the three kinds of supplies that we see: 7.1a, 7.1b, 7.1c. Supply which is in the course of furtherance of business with consideration. Second is may or may not be for business but for consideration. Third is without consideration. Now, if you look at Schedule 2, that was the fourth part which was there when the law had been brought in. That means Schedule 2 transaction was also deemed as a supply. But later on, what they did was they said that Schedule 2 supplies are not supplies in itself, right? That means Schedule 2 supplies are only for the purpose of classification between what is to be considered as supply of goods and what is to be considered as supply of services. It is only for the purpose of classification. It is not for the purpose of deeming it to be a supply, right? Now, this has actually opened a Pandora's box. A lot of transactions which were declared service under the earlier law, that means they were deemed as service under the earlier law, they are no longer deemed as service under the GST law. That means whatever is Schedule 2 does not mean it is a supply automatically till they are covered by the first three clauses of the supply definition. For instance, renting of immovable property. Till now, the decision of renting of immovable property is pending before the Supreme Court in case of Retailers Association of India, whether it is a supply of service or not. Since it is not deemed to be a service as of now under the GST law, that is why what we are seeing is that it may be argued that maybe renting of immovable property can be challenged, that it is not falling within 7.1, so coverage within schedule 2 would not automatically deem it to be a supply transaction. Further, Guwahati High Court in case of Magus Construction had held that construction activities which has been undertaken are in respect of the petitioner's own work, and it is only the completed construction work which is sold by the petitioner to the buyers. That means they are saying that when the property is being constructed, at that time there is no GST on that. There should not be any GST on that. That was what the High Court had said, right? And they had said that the construction is being done by the developer on their own, and only when finally the conveyance deed is given after the completion of the property, that is the time when the transfer of ownership happens to the buyers, right? But later on, there was a deeming fiction which was inserted in 2010, which said that flat construction was a service. Now, interestingly, this deeming fiction is no longer there in the GST law. It was only because of this deeming fiction that service tax was leviable under the earlier law. Once this deeming fiction is taken away, can one actually say that Schedule 2 is only covering this? Maybe the three clauses of the supply definition not covering this is something which can open a huge Pandora's box under GST. Not only this, a lot of other cases as well. If I'm transferring business asset without consideration wherein ITC is not availed, as per Schedule 2, wherever business asset is transferred without consideration, it would be considered as a Schedule 2 transaction. And the department earlier used to say that it is leviable to tax. But now we can very clearly say that Schedule 1, that is supply without consideration, covers only those cases wherein business asset is transferred without consideration and ITC is also availed on that. So if ITC is not availed, even though it may be covered within Schedule 2, since it is not covered within the supply definition, it will not be chargeable to tax. So if I have supplied any business asset without consideration and which I had not availed ITC, let us say I had bought a motor car on which I had not availed ITC in my business. Now I am giving that motor car free of cost without any consideration, and I had not taken ITC on that. So in that case, one may say that even this will not be chargeable to GST also. Next, agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act, tolerate an act. Now there are a lot of transactions which may be covered here, non-compete agreement or notice pay recovery. All these transactions, one may say that is covered under this case wherein which is agreeing to refrain from an act, liquidated damages. So all these cases we need to be very careful. Even now they are only covered in Schedule 2. For instance, if we talk about liquidated damages, since it is covered in Schedule 2, and liquidated damages nothing but something which is an payment arising out of any violation in a contract. So there is no supply, there is no quid pro quo, there is no consideration which is there if I violate a contract. This is only a penal provision which is there. So one may hold the view that liquidated damages are not chargeable to tax. Whereas department in a number of cases have said that agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act would be chargeable to tax, wherein liquidated damages would also be covered there, it would be chargeable to GST. But since it is covered in Schedule 2, this can be litigated in future. Next, a person ceases to be a taxable person, goods forming part of asset deemed to be a supply. So law says that if I am a person who was chargeable to tax under the earlier because I was having a turnover beyond the threshold limit of 20 lakh rupees, later on I cease to be a taxable person. That means I deregister myself because my turnover falls below the threshold limit. Then as per Schedule 2, whatever assets that I was holding on the date of deregistration, that would be deemed to be a supply to my own self. Once again, not covered under section 7, 1 ABC, but it is only covered under Schedule 2. One can hold a view. This is again part of Schedule 2. One may not be considering it as a deemed supply, even though it is there in Schedule 2. So again, this will stand the test of time. We are not holding a view. We are only saying there is a huge chance of litigation in these areas. Next, goods put to private or non-business use. So it has been said that if I have my laptop and if I'm using that laptop for my private purposes, let's say for my brother's wedding for 20 days, in that case it is deemed to be a supply as per Schedule 2. Once again, it is only in Schedule 2, not in the supply definition. One may say that this is not a transaction which may be chargeable to tax. A huge area of litigation awaits because the Schedule 2 has now been only there for classification between supply of goods and services and not for deeming what is a supply. So the intent with which it was drafted and the way it is there now, it's actually poles apart, the interpretation. So we need to be very careful about this. Now, ClearTax has this particular software which I think you can look at, which is a cloud-based software, which I'm sure a lot of people would be needing today based on the fact that a number of people are working from home, their staff are working from home. Helplines have been provided here with regard to the software. I'm sure it is need of the hour. Everyone needs to make sure that their office is coming online, making sure that their data, their software, the staff, everyone comes online. For that, we need a cloud-based software. So ClearTax is coming to you with a solution, which I'm sure you can contact them in the helplines. They'll be happy to share with you with regard to the software which they are providing, the details with regard to that, the intricacies, any features that you would want to understand. So I'm sure you can get in touch with ClearTax for that. With this, we come to the end of our presentation. I see a lot of questions which are there in the chat box, which I'll take up one by one right now. UPS with batteries. Okay, this is, I think you're talking about an advanced ruling judgment which said that in case of UPS with batteries, what would be the supply. I wouldn't get into the advanced ruling judgment, but if you ask me, if UPS is supplied with batteries, if it is part of the same transaction, if it is a composite supply, if it is naturally bundled, in that case, it should be considered as a composite supply. But if it is only given as a free transaction, which is a marketing type of transaction wherein batteries are given free of cost, then it would be considered as a mixed supply, right? So I would, depending on the nature of transaction, depending on how a supplier would actually supply UPS with batteries, we have to come to a conclusion on this part. Okay. Buy one get free as the nomenclature suggests that product which is getting should be identical. So buy one get one does not usually mean that it's identical products. I have also covered those cases where toothpaste and toothbrush are given together. So how you are doing it in marketing is something which is different. I'm only giving you the essence of the transaction. The essence of the transaction says that we need to understand what product is given free of cost, and based on the nature of the transaction, which kind of product is given, you would classify whether it is a composite or mixed supply. For example, along with TV, I get duffel bag or mixer grinder. Then this concept of buy one get one applicable, and can we take ITC on duffel bag or mixer? To my humble opinion, yes, you can take ITC on duffel bag or mixer, and whatever output is there on the TV, that would be chargeable to tax. Based on the fact that this is a mixed supply, higher rate of TV versus a duffel bag or mixer grinder would be applicable because this is nothing but a mixed supply. If it's transferred from existing asset on which ITC was availed long back, I guess we cannot use 17.5 and hence scenario may change. So when you're talking about ITC was availed long back, I'm assuming you're talking about those scenarios wherein ITC was availed before GST. To be honest, if you look at the definition of ITC, you would find that they are actually talking about ITC on IGST, CGST, SGST. They have not talked about ITC of VAT or excise. So essentially, if you're talking about permanent transfer under Schedule 1, even if you have availed ITC under the earlier law, which is before GST, then you may not be considered to have availed ITC at all under GST. So Schedule 1 may not be attracted. Technically, literal construction, doctrine of literal construction, wherein we are saying that ITC does not include the earlier law, right? So when we are talking about 17.5, whatever ITC, once again, that you have availed, that is required to be reversed. So if you had availed ITC long back before GST, and now you are disposing it off in the form of gift of free samples, In that case, once again I'm saying that ITC, since was not availed earlier, now also ITC may not need to be reversed under GST for sure. Whatever applicable under the earlier law, that would still stand, right? So if makeup artist and production house is registered in Maharashtra and shooting has happened in Delhi, whether makeup artist will charge IGST or CGST, SGST? Okay. So if makeup artist and production house is both registered in Maharashtra, even though the supply is happening, even though the transaction happening in Delhi, according to the place of supply transaction, location of supply would still be considered as makeup artist, because the makeup artist has its permanent establishment, fixed establishment in Maharashtra itself, and the recipient is also located in Maharashtra itself, assuming there is nothing which is there in Delhi. Then again, CGST, SGST would be chargeable irrespective of where the shooting is happening. If OC is received in respect of product project and ITC is lying in credit ledger, has not been reversed, neither it is utilized, whether interest would become payable at the time of reversal. So to my humble opinion, wherever OC has happened and your ITC is still there and you want to reverse your ITC, in my humble opinion, interest should not be applicable, because there was no failure to pay as per section 50. The cause of reversal of ITC arises today, which was not there earlier. So I cannot be said to have taken excess ITC. So in my humble opinion, interest should not be payable, right? ITC appearing in 2A but not in claimed in 3B, whether it should be shown under ineligible ITC, others, or reversal of ITC, others not mentioned in 3B since it was not claimed earlier. To be honest, right now we are taking ITC on self-assessment basis subject to 36(4). So if you're talking about those cases where your ITC is excess more than 110%, right? And in that cases, if you have excess ITC, in that case those ITC are not ineligible ITC. You should not show it as ineligible ITC, because tomorrow you never know, the supplier may actually upload the invoices and you may want to claim the ITC later on, right? So I would never want to show those invoices. Even though I'm reversing the ITC, I would never show it under ineligible ITC. I may reverse the credit and I may retake the ITC on that, but I would never show it as ineligible ITC. RC Verma, neither supplier nor recipient is under circumstances. I think there's no question which is there. Mr. Tirupati Rao, should we compulsory claim and reverse ITC appearing in 2A, or we can simply ignore the ineligible ITC appearing in 2A if it's not eligible, like composition or restaurant services? So you can directly ignore. There is no problem. There is no requirement that you should first take the ITC and then reverse the ITC. No, there is no requirement as such. If any ineligible ITC is appearing in your 2A, you can straight away ignore it. Mr. Vimal Jain, sir, in case of, I have already answered this question. Duffel bag also I have answered. I use some inputs to manufacture a goods. Manufacturing process went wrong and resultant product is of no use. I have to destroy output, meaning I am indirectly destroying input, right? So what do we mean by this? I use certain input, manufacturing process went wrong and resultant product is of no use. I have to destroy the output, I have to destroy the input. Okay. It is assumed as normal loss. Hence it is factored in cost of production. Hence it will become part of the cost. All right. So I think what you're asking about is not destruction of dead stock. You are talking about those cases wherein in the production there are certain losses which are happening. Now, once again, in production there are two kinds of losses. One loss may be in the form of normal loss, the other may be in the form of abnormal loss. So if the loss is in the form of normal loss, in that case, what will happen is that there will be no ITC reversal involved, because there is no destruction, no gift, there is no 17.5 which attracted, because there is no destruction which is happening outside the production, right? So in that case, what I would always say that in case of normal losses, there would not be any reversal of ITC required, nor any supply which needs to be shown. But if there is an abnormal loss which is happening wherein during production, let's say there's a flood which destroys your products, and if anything of that sort happens, which is an abnormal loss out of the normal context, in that case, I would say that 17.5H may become attractive, and then you may have to reverse the ITC on that. Therefore, cascading effect arises. I think I've already answered this question. If I supply affordable residential apartment along with sofa and chair, then is it considered as mixed supply as it does not seem to be naturally bundled? If so, what is the rate of tax? Sir, if you are doing so, wherein you are supplying affordable residential housing and then you are supplying sofa and chair, you are inviting a huge litigation, because if it is classified as mixed supply, in that case, it would be a huge area of litigation for you, because tomorrow the department may consider the higher rate of sofa and chair. So essentially, if I would have been there in your place, I would have had two contracts for supply of the apartment and the supply of sofa. And at least, even if I'm supplying sofa, I would not write that in the contract I'm supplying sofa for which it is being supplied free of cost. I would not be doing that. Please don't enter into those kind of contracts. Residential real estate project ITC appearing in 2A but not claimed in 3B, whether it is to be shown in ineligible ITC, others, or reversal of ITC. Yes. So when you're talking about residential real estate project, in that case, specifically the notification says that whatever input tax credit is appearing in 2A which you're not taking, which is ineligible ITC, that particular ITC needs to be shown in your ineligible ITC. Since you're 5% under 5% tax rate, your input, you are not eligible for that, then you are required to show it under ineligible ITC. That is a scenario where the law has mandated you to do it, not in every cases, right? With this, we come to the end of our session. I think we have resolved all the questions which had come in the chat box. I would like to thank all the participants for participating in this session today and hearing me out. Thank you so much for your patient hearing. See you another time. Thank you. And you can always look at other videos of ClearTax as well if you're looking for knowledge enhancing. I'm sure there are a lot of videos in this channel which you can subscribe to and look at the videos. Right? Thank you so much.